Delighted on this episode to be talking with someone who is immersed in the world of stories, written stories, embodied stories, and that is author, actor, creator Armin Shimerman. Armin, thank you for joining and talking with me for a few minutes.
My pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, as have I been. Folks out there will know you for voiceover work for Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Boston Legal, and a number of other projects. And they should also know you for the Merchant Prince series as well as the Illyria series, which both of which focus on a particular historical figure who has some very interesting elements happening with him. So, delighted to be talking about those worlds that you're building. And the first official question is usually something about origins. So I'm curious about what led you to the written word and to storytelling in general.
Sure. As far as the written word is concerned, when I was 10 or 11, I started writing. Was fortunate enough to get a poem published, and that sort of said to me, well, maybe I could be a writer. And I always was fascinated by writing, loved reading good authors.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, the theater bug bit me a little couple of years later, and I put all that aside. But in the midst of shooting TV shows, I found a lot of time on my hands sitting in a trailer waiting to be called to set. And the old thoughts about writing came back to me, and I started jotting things down. And after a while, accumulated enough stuff to sort of say, okay, maybe I should write some books now.
Love that. I love that. I also connected with writing because of a poem publication early on. And I imagine as an actor, you've had the chance to sit in a chair for large amounts of time as you've been prepping for roles and preparing. So what a wonderful way to spend the time in the chair to be thinking about the stories that you want to tell.
With all due respect, I don't think about writing when I'm sitting in the chair.
That
I
makes
have to
sense.
wear my actor's cap at that time, and I'm thinking about the work I'm about to do that day, making sure that I have my lines memorized. If it's a new actor that I'm working with and they're sitting next to me, then I try to set up a conversation so that I have some affinity with this person who I've never met before, who's,
Ah,
spending, that I'm supposed to know, my character is supposed to know all their life. So trying to set that up. Writing takes a back seat. But while that's
I
watching
understand.
TV and I have off, I go back to my trailer and think about writing.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So what is that process like for you of world building and stepping into sort of the Illyria universe, the alchemy, the Medici's, and all of those elements?
Well, I've written two different types of trilogies about John Dee. John Dee is the historical character you mentioned earlier.
Hmm.
So his life is laid out. We have a pretty good idea of what his life was like. He's rather infamous and famous in Elizabethan times. Most people aren't aware of him, but if you begin to study the period, his name begins to crop up quite a bit. So I had a pretty good idea of Elizabethan times. I have been a Shakespeare scholar since college. I graduated with a degree in English, specialization in Shakespeare. That took me to acting in Shakespeare almost immediately after college, actually before I graduated. And and so the world of Elizabeth's is something I'm enormously familiar with. So that world building, I was sort of just paying attention to what I had studied in books. Now, in the Merchant Prince series, which is it's just science fiction series of books. Yes,
Hmm.
then I'm building a world, and because I've been involved in science fiction all my life as an actor, uh, I borrowed here and there from various projects that I've been involved in. And also just my imagination took off and I began to think, okay, what would this be like? And how would someone from the deep past fit into the deep future?
Yeah, I love that. What a great way to prepare for writing a book, getting a degree in the subject and something adjacent. Curious about a favorite sonnet, a favorite play of Shakespeare, to take a Shakespearean question here.
Sure. I'm not, I don't have, well, I suppose, 29, I suppose, When in Disgrace with Fortune in Men's Eyes is probably
Love that one. Yes, yes.
My favorite play, I often, when asked that question, I usually say it's the one I'm doing at the time. So, having just directed Twelfth Night, which closed about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I would have to say Twelfth Night is my favorite. Also, the Illyria series is based on the characters from Twelfth Night. So, again, I suppose Twelfth Night is my favorite.
Yeah, yeah. 29 is also my favorite sonnet. It's just it hits a little different than the other ones for me.
It
It's
does. It
the
does. And
pathos.
when you're in despair, it's a good one to think about to get you out of it. And
Hmm.
oftentimes we are hit by despair. I'm sure Shakespeare was hit by it often as well. And it certainly helps me at tough times.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, your work spans multiple volumes. You mentioned both trilogies, and I'm curious about the process of sort of planning those arcs out. Is that something that you have in mind from the beginning? Is it more something that unfolds as you go?
Um, I pretty much always knew what the beginnings and the ends were. I had no idea what the middles were. And as you said, this sort of crops up as I go. In each book, as I was reading, I always read stuff about Elizabethan times. So I would read something and that would inspire something, and I would write it down. Then I would go down a rabbit hole following that thought, and eventually would move on to something else. But it was haphazard. I've been thinking about this question quite a bit, Jason, and I really believe that should I sit down and write another book, and I hope to do that someday,
Hmm.
that I would plan out what the scenes were ahead of time. Waiting for the muse to strike you as a haphazard affair, and I don't have that much time left. So I would like to plan out what the scenes are going to be, and then whatever the muse whispers into my ear as far as description or dialogue, I'll appreciate that a great deal.
Yeah. You've already explored two different genres surrounding this historical person, Dr. John Dee. Any idea of what the next venture might be? Is there something new that you'd like to try or some new avenue?
But I'm a little loath to talk about it because it's just percolating in my mind. But I believe the one that's percolating in my head, because I've studied Shakespeare for so long, I believe it will be a novel about an older Shakespeare. My Illyria series is about a
Uh,
younger Shakespeare. He's the secondary character, John Dee being the first character. But if I write another book, I have a feeling it will be about Shakespeare at the end of his career, pondering whether or not the choices he made to become an actor, to become a writer, become a playwright, or as he would call it, a poet, um, was it worthwhile? Because he had no way of knowing. In fact,
yeah.
theater at that time was considered pornography. So the idea that he'd made his life in pornography, using that analogy, could not have been really satisfying. So he has to think, was this worthwhile? All the sacrifices I made for my career, and will it make any difference? Of course, we in hindsight know that it did, but he at the time will not. And that's what all artists face. Will any of this make a difference?
Yeah, very well said. Very well said. Speaking of the voice of the poet, the people in your books have a particular way of speaking. There's a sensibility to it. I'm wondering how you go about capturing and creating that.
That's easy. How many years now is it? Let's see. Uh, 50 years of doing Shakespeare, reading Shakespeare, teaching Shakespeare is a mother's milk to me.
Hmm.
I understand it really well, and I try my best to emulate it, to put it down on the page the way I think it would be said. I have pretty much the vocabulary, but it's not so much the vocabulary, it's also the rhetoric. If I can follow Shakespeare's rhetoric, then I think I can imitate in a poor way the way they spoke.
Yeah, very interesting. And my minimal understanding of Shakespeare is that there were levels of speech, if that's correct. There's a way
No,
that one
no,
speaks
you're
at the court.
misunderstood. No, this is
Ah,
the canard that I've been trying to dispel from students' heads for 30 years. No, there were not different levels of speech. There were different levels of writing, but not of speech.
ah,
The way Shakespeare wrote, I'm very sure, is not the way he spoke.
hmm, hmm.
That's the way he wrote, and that was the way they were all trained to write. there's a particular training to writing at that time, and it's called rhetoric. And they studied rhetoric from the beginning, first days of school to the last days of college. That's the way they put thoughts together. Now, they might incorporate some of that in their speech. Yes, that's very possible. And the more witty people might do it better than others. But did people speak in iambic pentameter? No, no.
That makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense. Otherwise, you would be pausing all the time to count the trochees or something like that.
Exactly. And if I may, it's really quite easy. I should take back what I just said. It's actually quite easy to speak in iambic pentameter. We tend to do it sometimes naturally. We're just not counting the trochees, as you say, or the
Uh,
ions.
uh, Lovely. Well, thank you for telling me that because I teach rhetoric, and so I'm glad to know that. I will join you in the fight against that mistruth.
Good. Yeah. Rhetoric is the key to understanding Shakespeare. It's not so much the language. The language is pretty modern. Um, as I've said to my students on many occasions, English as we know it, modern English, and you probably know this as a teacher as well, modern English was only about 100 years old when Shakespeare was writing. So before
Hmm.
that, it was Middle English, which sounded very different than what we have today. Uh, I'm going to quote some Chaucer here, which I'm sure you've done for your class as well. When that opera with his sure suta, the druchte marche perseter, the ruta every vein in switch liquor, of which vertu Agendura, that's Middle English, and English had
Hmm.
changed that to modern English, which is what Shakespeare was writing in. And not only writing in, but creating as well. All the people in that time span were creating modern English.
Yeah, just fascinating things with. You were talking about the difference between writing and speaking, and very particular processes related to both of those activities for the human mind.
That's right. Oh, they were very good at remembering what they heard. I believe, just a guess, but I believe because literacy was so rampant at that time, and even the people who could read and were very good readers, they were all trained to listen better than we do and to
Mm,
remember what they heard. There are instances, many historical references to younger people going to sermons, coming home to their families who were too decrepit to go to church, and repeating almost word for word what the sermon was to their older parents, older grandparents. They were really good at hearing and remembering what they heard. And in Shakespeare's case, he was probably very good at that. He was also a prolific plagiarist. He stole
mhm.
from everybody. And so a lot of what we read actually was probably written somewhere else first.
Yeah,
Shakespeare just stole it and made it better.
yeah, yeah. The dross and gold.
Yeah, which is what I'm doing with Illyria. Stealing a little, trying to make it better.
And passing on the story, which is part of what we do as well. I was going to ask where you're going next in authoring, but we might have covered that. Anything that you'd like to mention about your next creative pursuits before we talk about where people can find you?
Sure. I'm happy to say I've just finished directing 12th Night, as I just mentioned, and now in about
Hmm.
2 weeks I start rehearsing as an actor in an Irish play called Outside Mullingar by John Patrick Shanley, and I'm looking forward to doing that. So I'm switching from sitting and giving people notes to being told what to do.
Nice, nice. I imagine at your level, that's a pretty adept shift from one role to another.
It's a shift that I'm used to having, yes.
Yes, yes. Well, curious about where people can go to find the books and to follow up more and to learn more about you.
Sure. Okay, so these are the books. This is Illyria. It is a trilogy. Um,
Hmm.
it's written under my name, Armin Shimerman. And where you can find it, well, the easiest place, of course, uh, would be to go to the printer. Um, we have a website. It's called Jumpmaster Press.
Hmm.
And if you go to jumpmasterpress.com, Jumpmaster Press is all one word, and just look for Armin Schimmelman, you'll be able to find the books. So far, everyone who has read the books has been very complimentary. I'm very
Hmm.
proud of the work. I must say, it wasn't something I did just off the top of my head. It took 20 years. This is 20
Yeah.
years writing.
Wow.
And mainly because my acting work often got in the way of my writing. But I wanted to tell that story ever since I finished doing the Merchant Prince trilogy. I was writing about John Dee, and when I was finishing up the Merchant Prince trilogy, I said to the ghost of John Dee, I've done you a disservice. I haven't written anything that's anything like your life. And I really want to write some books about the way you actually lived. And the Illyria series is pretty close to all the facts we have about John Dee. And in fact, there is some suggestion, not in my, it is in my book, but in scholars, that may have, John Dee had the largest library in England at the time. And it is possible, more than likely actually, that Shakespeare had access to that library or had access to John Dee. Understand that books were really hard to come by at that time, that they cost a ton of money, and not everybody had a library. So where did Shakespeare read these books that he stole from? Um, and and there's one particular instance. This is one of my favorite stories. Um, Scholars believe that Richard II, one of Shakespeare's history plays, is based on a poem called Treizain, which is a French poem. And um, and scholars have looked for, well, who had a copy of Treizain. And it turns out the only person who really had a copy of Treizain was John Dee.
So there's a connection.
There's a connection. And there is some supposition, and that's all it is, that John Dee may have been the architect for the globe as well.
Nice, nice. I love the history and the mystery and how those
As
things
I
weave
said, the more you
together.
investigate Elizabethan times, the name John Dee begins to crop up quite a bit. It's just that he did something that most scholars over the centuries have poo-pooed, and he sort of laughed at for this pursuit that he followed. He was a brilliant, brilliant man who just went down a rabbit hole for something that he thought he could do. It made sense at the time, but it doesn't make sense to us now. And that was he thought he could talk to angels.
Ah,
And if you believed in angels, and it was a very religious time, if you believed in heaven, if you believed there were angels, eh, then there must be a way to talk to them. And he believed the angels had their own language, and he studied their language. How he went about studying is too long a course for me to relate here, but he did, and because he did that, literary scholars and historians, as I said, poo-pooed him because of that pursuit.
well, there are worse vices to have.
Brilliant mathematician, a brilliant librarian. He was a spokesman for the Queen. He was an astrologer, an astronomer for the Queen. He did a number of things for the Queen, and it was very much represented and well respected. If a scholar came from Europe, invariably they went to Mortlake to visit John Dee.
I love that. Yeah, the years that you put into this are obvious, both in holding up that beautiful box set, which you said was 20 years of work, and also in the rich information that you have as well.
Yeah, I think not only will you have I believe a really wonderful mystery story and trying to figure out, who did it, but you will also be introduced to the ways and cultures and superstitions of the Elizabethan times. There's a great Elizabethan poet who said the purpose of literature is both to entertain and to educate. And that was my guidepost while I was writing. I wanted to entertain and I also wanted to educate.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Something to take away for the pleasure of it as well as to learn. Love that combination. Well, we could talk process much longer, I'm sure, but I won't keep you. Like Lark at break of day, here you are joining Zoom, and I greatly appreciate that. And I do appreciate the time that you've spent in both talking with me and in sharing this work as well. And I hope that people will go and check it out.
I hope they will. Jumpmasterpress.com, Armin Shimerman. and if you don't want to navigate that, you can always go to Amazon.com. We're sold there too, but my publishers get a bigger share if you go to their website as opposed to Amazon. So
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, many, many thanks. I greatly appreciate the time. Did we miss anything that you want to make sure to include before we close out?
I think this has been lovely. No, this has been terrific. Thank you, Jason.